Something like this is going to change how we practice day in, day out. Today or tomorrow, this is all happening very quickly.
And the conversation literally started out by saying that AI, we are worried about that it's going to replace our jobs. But that's not truly the case. I think it's going to replace who are the physicians who are not willing to embrace this technology.
Dr. Rohit Gosain and Dr. Rahul Gosain are the Oncology Brothers.
They're practicing oncologists on a mission to disseminate information to the community and bridge the gap between academia and community oncology.
I was drowning in data.
We are reading so much. Despite that, we are drowning.
Nothing's black and white. Rohit practice looks different than my practice. Instead of this being yet another tool, we have to at least embrace things are moving fast.
You have to figure out how do you actually do successful change management in a healthcare setting. In oncology, there are 40 to 50 new drug approvals and indications every single year. How is any oncologist supposed to keep up with that and still see patients? We touch on that with my two guests, Drs. Rohit and Rahul Gosain, also known as the Oncology Brothers. Rohit is an oncologist at Roswell Park and has an unconventional background as a computer engineer. And Rahul practices at the Wilmot Cancer Institute and holds an MBA alongside his MD. Together, they built one of the most followed oncology podcasts in the country, created specifically to cut through the noise for community oncologists. We start with how their podcast came to be: two brothers, long commutes, and a shared feeling that no one was really making the latest research actually usable at the bedside. From there, we get into the AI adoption question. Rohit is using ambient AI for documentation, but Rahul, by his own admission, is not. It was really fun to watch the two debate both sides and discuss what it would really take to get more oncologists on board. Finally, we talk about where AI is creating real-world value in community oncology beyond scribing, from clinical trial screening to closing care gaps. The Gosains simply have a perspective you don't hear enough. Let's get into it. Today, we have Dr. Rohit Gosain and Rahul Gosain, both brothers, and they are the Oncology Brothers. Thank you guys so much for joining us on the podcast.
Matt, thank you for having us.
Indeed. Thanks so much, sir. Looking forward to our conversation.
I would love to kind of just start by, the origin story. You guys are both podcasters. You guys have kind of seen the importance of kind of getting the latest news out there to all of your peers. Can you just kind of start by sharing with us kind of how you guys started, how this idea came about, and kind of really what the mission of it is?
Often there's this one particular instance where you can go back and be like, boom, this is the need. I think shortly after fellowship, my first job, community oncologist. Back then and even now, the big problem has been data overload. The field's moving fast. How do we keep up with it? And I was drowning in data. Shortly thereafter, Rohit's in the same position, new job, and day in, day out, back and forth commuting. Over the phone, Rohit and I would talk through, what are you making out of this? How do we put this into practice for that patient in front of us? And then quickly we hit a ceiling. There's only so much that we can bounce back and forth with each other. So we moved these conversations to social media. Those social media discussions quickly turn into these podcast discussions and now live conferences as well, where the goal ends up being, yes, there's information overload. Let's bridge that gap between all the research, bring it to our clinical practice with these bite-sized discussions. And here we are with Oncology Brothers.
All right, Rahul, I'll just add some of these snippets and let me put some practical twist to this. When this conversation was happening, this was about an hour and a half or 2-hour ride that we were taking each day. And every single day we were thinking about new nuances, new patients. And we're like, we can't be the only ones struggling, especially when we have ASCO Post subscribed, and then we are NEJM member, JAMA subscribed, and we are reading so much. Despite that, we are drowning. We can't be the only one. And that's where we were like, how about we convert our conversations into bite-sized formats? Because there were CME, there were podcasts at that point in time too, and this still exists today. And we're like, well, it's 2 to 3 hour conversation. We can't put that out there. So combining all that and tying in that 15 to 20 minute of that conversation, which all the community oncologists can literally listen to it. And when they're even listening at 2.0 speed, that turns out to be 7.5 minutes of conversation. So how can we do that? And I still remember, Rahul, that phone call after that ASCO where you're like, well, Rohit, we just put our tweets out on ASCO. How about we just talk about this on our podcast? I'm like, Rahul, we need tools and all that. But it all started and it was just like, and snippet, and we are Oncology Brothers podcast.
And now you guys are famous.
I don't know about that, but but glad to see that it's helping out everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a small tribe of us that are oncology specific podcasters out there. And I totally agree with kind of the importance of trying to, fill through the AI slop and all the crazy material out there that maybe is just like virtue signaling or like too futuristic, and like what are some of the practical applications that physicians can use today. I think that's such an important kind of thing to have, a resource for oncologists to have. I know you guys are brothers. I have a sister myself. I wanted to kind of ask, like, on the podcast or in some of the topics that you guys have talked about, especially when it comes to AI and cancer care, where do you guys disagree? Like, are there any things that you guys kind of don't see eye to eye on? Anything that you guys kind of have different opinions on?
Before we answer that question, let's level set things. Rohit's a computer engineer. So there are a lot of things we might not see eye to eye on. He always has that computer engineer hat on. From the get-go, I've been in basic science, then medical school, did my MBA. So let's take a step back and appreciate that and then get into this.
No, I'd say that every time I've talked about an idea to Rahul, he's like, Rohit, like, you just need to break it down for me. And I'll be talking a bit more technical and just trying to put these snippets around him. But he'll be like, for him, I'll have to create a presentation as if I'm presenting it to the executive leadership. I'm like, Rahul, convincing you is even harder to convince an audience outside. And that's what makes us sort of unique and bring in those prospects whenever we are discussing some of the patient information or even just the treatment aspects. I still remember where I'm seeing a patient with breast cancer today. Rahul was like, Rohit, I would use TCHP versus TCH in this treatment option, where we just saw that that update from SABCS. But again, that's what makes it an art, and a unique art rather.
Matt, coming back to agreements and disagreements, I think be it in our practice or AI tools around this, nothing's black and white, and oncology being a perfect example. Rohit practice looks different than my practice. And again, that's where these conversations are so important. You brought up if there are AI tools that we disagree with, be it even the LLMs or here, DeepScribe being another example of how we're using all that's available to us in our clinical practice. It looks different for every single practice.
And I talk about AI, Rahul. We just came off the conversation with Dr. Travis Zach from Open Evidence, and that was very enlightening conversation with regards to how fast people have adopted to the world of AI. And this is just the beginning more than anything. And I still remember when even the smallest change in EHR where we cringed to adopt it, and this is a huge change. And the conversation literally started out by saying that AI, we are worried about that it's going to replace our jobs. But that's not truly the case. I think it's going to replace who are the physicians who are not willing to embrace this technology. And that's where we have to leverage this technology to our advantage, whether that's for research, whether that's for summarizing articles. And this is not by endorsement or advertisement by any means. I am using DeepScribe and thank Matthew and his team, where it has really eased off my note-making capabilities, where I just turn this on, summarizes everything for me, and now I'm able to focus what is more important for a patient and their family members.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing in AI right now is really interesting, because I think the pace of innovation is happening at a rate that I think is very difficult for healthcare to keep up with. Healthcare has traditionally been an industry that is, slow to adopt. And when you have technology that is moving faster than ever, you're dealing with the consequences of maybe having a bad first impression of using a technology that, by the time it's fully implemented, a new version of that technology has fully kind of come out. And I think what's also unique in oncology specifically is that, the difference between the community setting and the academic setting, typically where we, just in the case of AI scribes, at the academic setting, what we're typically finding is that the choice in the AI solutions that you use typically have to satisfy kind of this multi-specialty mandate across the entire organization. Whereas if it's just a specific community practice, they can kind of select more purpose-built solutions for them. The difference that we're seeing in the level of adoption between the academics and the community in, example like AI scribes, I think it kind of points to this last mile of, product building for AI, which is, it was one thing to have this really amazing technology, but it's a second thing to figure out, okay, like, how do I actually get people to trust this? How do I make this AI sound like them? How do I get people to integrate this into their existing workflow? All those things, I think, as a non-oncologist, as just kind of a data nerd turned healthcare entrepreneur, that was one of like the most hard thing for me to understand, is that sometimes the best technology doesn't actually win. You have to figure out, how do you actually do successful change management in a healthcare setting.
The challenges that you're talking about, Matthew, they are huge, and that is adaptability. And that too, changing years and years of people utilizing something and now adding that. Well, the transition from paper chart to AHR was huge, and now adding that AI element is, again, the other aspect that ties into the healthcare industry is credibility and trust, especially when the patient information is tied in. And that's where, again, finding those nuances and making sure that security is the top priority is well handled. And I feel like they're on moving small moves itself makes a huge difference.
Matt, you brought up that first impression. I think that is so important, right? But given how fast things are changing, that first impression might not be what we have available right this minute. 2 years ago, LLMs, there was this idea that, oh my God, we're making up references that don't exist. And that still might be true, but that is a very small number now. So the technology is indeed moving fast. And then second, when we're comparing things in academia versus community, the need is different, not just the barriers, the need is also different. Someone in academia might be a lot more focused on clinical trials. Again, that should be the case. We should be doing a lot more of that in community practice as well. But now in my community practice, if a lot of my practice is more clinical driven, my needs different. So I think that, be it Scribe, be it all the other open evidence LLMs that are available, we have to keep all that in mind.
And Matthew, just to build up on this, what are the challenges that you have faced from the Scribe selling standpoint, especially when you're facing quite a bit of competition where big companies are tying in all these Scribe material, part of their EHR, part of their bundle package, and tying in whether is it different approach that you take for community oncologists or community practice in general versus academics?
Yeah, that's a great question. I touched on it a little earlier. I think, where we are finding a lot of success is really in the community practices. And I think the reason why is because when we, talk to a lot of these oncology departments at these AMCs, they're typically evaluating your tools based off of what is good for everybody, right? Not just the oncology department. Whereas if we're talking to these community oncology practices, they're looking for something that is oncology specific, and that is indeed what we've built. And there's so much complexity and so much nuance in cancer care that I think it makes the workflow and the documentation that is subsequently produced extremely unique, right? And for us, we saw that as an opportunity to build a differentiated product. There's the little things like a lot of physicians, when they see follow-up visits, they pull for their last note. And so rather than pulling all the context from the conversation, you need to be able to understand the oncologic history of the patient. These are just like small things that are important details for oncology, but it's very difficult for a technology vendor that is supporting hundreds of different specialties at the same time to prioritize as something that they need to build. Where we're going is really like, okay, you have a product that kind of works. The change management piece is, I think, another thing that a lot of people overlook, right? So not only building like a purpose-built oncology specific model, it's about like, how can you make a really good first impression? To Rahul's point, one of the things my mom used to always tell me is that you can't make a first impression twice.
Very true.
And it's really kind of unfortunate in technology adoption, because these technologies are advancing so quickly that I think we need to have a cultural change in healthcare where they're almost like forced to constantly try the technology as it improves, because the impression that you get in the first time may not be the impression that you get the second time. And that's part of, I think, the change management that I wish had happened. But I think the part of the change management that I think really worked for us is, we deploy people at the elbow, right? We want the physicians to feel like they have somebody that they can go to ask any of the questions, to build and develop trust in the product that they're using. And these are just some things that I think, living in the San Francisco Bay Area, building startups is not a well-known kind of problem that people are used to. They think, building the best technology, throw it over the fence and people will love it. But unfortunately in healthcare, and especially in oncology, we see that not to be the case.
Can we take a few minutes, candidly, talk through this? Rohit, you are using this, right? Coming back to using this being DeepScribe. I am not. I am still stuck with either dictating or often just typing things away because I'm telling myself this is how I'm going to remember when I see my patient next or when I'm going to carry forward if I have to, then I know exactly what's going on. Rohit, from user perspective, two things that you think this is helping you. And then I would love to hear from you, Matt, like two things as a vendor that you're promising, saying, is it helping take care of more patients? Is it saving time? So walk me through, because again, I have not used this in my practice and I would love to use something that's going to make me more efficient or deliver that better care.
Oh, I'll tell you two major points and even tie in more that whenever I'm seeing a patient, when this is on, now if I'm catching up on my notes a couple of days after, sure, where you recall the patient's face and you can put everything down on your note here, it's all in there. The entire conversation, little by little, when the patient mentioned the GI physician's name, where I'm just like calling the patient back, what was the name again? Or what was the medication that you changed? So all of this is typed in a very, very succinct format. And not even just that, when I'm done, it also integrates the billing codes as well. So now that eases off the billing code capabilities too. So all of this is being tied appropriately, which is now if you tie in the AI component to even a next level where nursing calls get recorded, where they are just turning this on and it all gets decoded back in the back end there. So it just eases off a lot of the documentation more than anything. And now this is all done when you're putting in the referral. The note goes along with that as opposed to someone tracking. The referral is in and the note is not in.
Aside from just helping save time, I think Rohit brought up a really good point about how it's also helping with the billing and coding. We released an abstract with the Journal of Clinical Pathways late last year. And we showed that we're not only able to, achieve extremely high levels of adoption, save doctors time, basically what everyone, Rohit is citing. We're also able to improve the quality of the documentation. So we were able to show, a 45% increase in the amount of social determinants of health captured. We're able to show a 22% increase in the amount of comorbidities captured. Another 22% increase in the amount of diagnosis codes captured, because we see a lot of oncologists, they don't actually capture the primary care that they're delivering. They just, document the cancer. And so we're able to show the improvement in the quality of the documentation as well. But I think, going back to this question about adoption, the reason why, the problem that we're solving is so interesting to me personally is not just in the fact that we can save physicians time and, bring back the joy of care for them. We can take this novel data set of these ambient conversations that we're generating and use that to develop novel insights that can hopefully improve patient outcomes. We're working on studies right now to see if we can use these transcripts to identify non-medical contextual clues that patients are leaving in that conversation that we should nudge providers about. Can we use our pre-chart summary to remind physicians about the toxicity profiles of the treatments that they're about to put their patients on and say, hey, this lab just came back, it's out of the range of the toxicity, you should keep an eye on this. There's so many things that we can do by embedding AI into the workflow that it's not just about, again, what is valuable today. It's about, hey, once you get on this platform, what are all the possibilities that you're now kind of preparing yourself to also, receive as the technology improves.
And I just want to hone into the quality of the data, Rahul, one second, because of the fact that now, how many times when you're seeing a patient, you're talking about smoking cessation, nutritional aspect, but rarely you would document that. Now that is all added to the documentation as well. Sure, one part is billing, but that's not the only thing. It just adds to the quality. And to what Matthew is saying, now you can run studies based on what these screening modalities have you touched on, and everything can be referred back. At the end of the day, AI matters a huge deal because of the data that you have at hand.
Rohit, I don't know about you. My documentation's perfect. No, just kidding. But
I've seen
on a
it.
serious note, this is what we're here for, right? At the end of the day, all these tools, are they making me more efficient, or are they giving us better outcomes for our patients? Ideally, both. That's what we're aiming for. So I think that, again, instead of this being yet another tool, we have to at least embrace things are moving fast. Something like this is going to change how we practice day in, day out. Today or tomorrow, this is all happening very quickly.
I think, Rahul, that's one aspect, the important aspect that we can even all tie in. We'll see if we can get a chance to touch on this. If we can even speed up our clinical trials, which we have seen a hint of this, there are studies with regards to that. Now, even having access to these AI tools available in community, that you can increase the accrual that way at all or not.
I would love to see that, but at least today, we really have to be careful in balancing over promising, over delivering
Without a
versus
doubt.
what the actual reality is as well, right? Again, I would love to see that. I would love to see better clinical trials. I would love to see all the AI tools give us better drugs so that our patients are living longer and better at cheaper cost. Of course, I would love for all that to happen. But again, are we there? No.
Oh,
I
no,
hope
right.
that's where we move to. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also the process of like, there's like an adoption curve with technology. There's like the early innovators that are, taking that risk. And then, as we are able to develop, more studies and more proof points and validation, it starts to kind of diffuse down that curve. I'm curious, like Rahul, like as what I would characterize as a skeptic, correct me if I'm wrong, what kind of like proof are you looking for? Like, is it just like, hey, like does Mayo need to put out a study that says they were able to increase their trial accruals by X% because they were able to adopt this AI tool? Like, is it just social proof? Are you looking for like validated, peer-reviewed, studies? Like, what do you think would convince you to say, hey, like this is better than the status quo, and you should adopt this?
He's waiting for
Absolutely.
me to put an executive presentation for him to convince him.
There we go. Yeah, that would help. But again, I think that when we're saying I'm skeptic for I think not AI in general, but certain tools. When we're talking about what am I looking for, again, it has to be making me efficient or better outcomes for my patients. I'm not looking for XYZ to publish one article and say, hey, now that big institution is doing it, I should be doing it. Just before even we jumped, minutes before this, JAMA had this article published saying, maybe these AI tools are not buying us all that much time. I've not dig into that article much, so I can't say whole lot more about that. This is just a quick abstract. But again, maybe that was a year ago and things have already changed. So, what would make me adapt this in my clinical practice? This being Scribe, because I'm heavily using LLMs already. A lot of it is trust, a lot of it is comfort, a lot of it is also somewhat driven through institutions saying, hey, broadly, we're enrolling. Or broadly, we're making this available to all our physicians. I think those are some of the things. As if now, when I played around with initial Scribe, I felt like it was just not me. Those were not my words. Those were not my thoughts. It was filling in gaps that I did not think sounded like me. So I'm looking for a dragon, if you may, but also a smart, active phrases that are coming along and it's just making things easier rather than making up things that I would not have appreciated.
And Raul, I'll just dive into what you said initially, Matthew, is adaptability. And that's where I initially was hesitant in utilizing some of the scribes itself or experimenting. And now after utilization and how, again, the technology continues to change and it has changed, that has become much more easier. I feel like it's just that shift or that curve to try it. And once you see the adaptability, or rather see that ease that comes along with it, I feel like that's where the shift is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're about to hit this point. Today, it's like technology is the worst it will ever be. And, as it improves, a lot of the accuracy concerns, a lot of the peer-reviewed journals that are going to come out, I think there's going to be a moment where we're going to be faced with the reality that a lot of these tools are going to not just help clinicians practice to the top of their license, they might actually help, provide better care. Like, doctors plus AI will lead to better care than what doctors are able to do today on the status quo.
That is what we want.
And I think the biggest question that we have to ask ourselves is like, how do we prepare for ourselves for that moment? Because it's not if it will come, it's when it will come.
Yeah.
And,
Very true.
in that case, it's like the adaptability problem is like such a huge issue because it almost becomes kind of like a moral dilemma, right? Like if you know there's a tool out there that's going to provide better outcomes to a patient, does it become a discretionary tool that you can use? Or is it, something that's compulsory that everyone needs to learn how to adopt, regardless of how adaptable, how easy it is to adapt to the solution? It's a very kind of interesting question. And it's not saying we're there now, but you have to figure out how do you prepare yourself for that moment.
But again, coming back to that, having that balance between being overcritical versus being over-promising thing. And here we are saying it's going to cure everything. Everything is going to be a whole lot better. And then the other side of things ends up being, I'm still waiting for a fax machine, right? Anyone listening to this is still stuck because I can't get records across the street. So again, I'm hoping that, of course, this takes us to what you brought up, Matt. It hopefully will make us deliver better care for our patients.
I think in terms of like the feedback that we're getting and some of the studies that we're doing, a lot of it is around time savings. It's around bringing back the joy of care to medicine. And I I was in healthcare long enough when they kind of expanded the triple aim to the quadruple aim, and now they finally started caring about physician satisfaction.
Right.
And we also can all appreciate how important physician burnout and physician, satisfaction is to actually producing good outcomes. Today, it's really kind of focused on that portion of the quadruple aim of like how can you apply technology to make work easier. Once we started getting to the point where we're automating knowledge work and we're also helping provide clinical decision support, that is, I think, entering a different risk profile. Which, to your point, we can't kind of just sit here virtue signaling that's going to say it's going to save, it's going to cure cancer, and oncologists aren't going to exist. But I think for now, in terms of these, it's really interesting to see how fast the adoption has been for these workflow tools that are relatively low risk, and the difference that we're seeing in the ones that are adopting and are not adopting is really around the adaptability to the point that Rohit made.
Matthew, with regards to the AI component, all we have been hearing about, at least a major impact from medical aspect, is radiology imaging, the scribe
Pathology.
or billing aspect of it, and open evidence, which is, again, it's all LLMs. What are other ways, at least from community oncology standpoint, that you could educate us how AI is being leveraged to assist oncologists outside of just these things I mentioned?
The one that I've seen that was really interesting. So I was just in New Orleans last 2 weeks ago at the annual CAGLA conference, and I was on the AI panel talking to a few other entrepreneurs. And I've seen there's a lot of really interesting work that's getting traction around clinical trials, right? Being able to just screen patients, maybe not say, hey, this person is like, we should totally send them and sign them up. Just do the initial screening, right? And like just going through all the patient records, labeling all that data, and then applying the inclusion criteria so that they can give it to an actual research coordinator and say, hey, here are the ones that you should actually look at and spend some time on. And we've already kind of pre-filled some of this stuff out for you. They've been able to, show, really good outcomes. I can't remember the exact, numbers to kind of say on this podcast, but I remember when I was looking at the presentation, I was really impressed with the work that they were doing. The other is, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the company Tempus. They're doing a lot in terms of leveraging the big data around the testing and to be able to identify care gaps to be able to close, right? So another thing that I think it's just about, I think where the technology today that is making a lot of traction is like serving as this kind of safety net, right? Or this initial screener, right? So like right now, a lot of the bottlenecks that I see in oncology is not just the oncologist, but all the other clinical stakeholders that are involved in that patient's journey, right? The research coordinators, the people on the front desk, the billing and the coding team. If you can help do these initial screenings that, are very difficult to be done today, this manual work, and you can just kind of put this AI layer and say, we're going to screen every single one of your patients to see if, they require an NGS test. We're going to screen it if they are eligible for a clinical trial. And then you pass that on to kind of a human in the loop and just the original workflow that you see today. You're seeing massive gains in the coverage and their ability to actually like, not just like make their time more efficient, but the value of the work that they're doing is so much higher because they're spending their time on things, where we've already found kind of the needle in the haystack.
Absolutely. Again, it's helping you prioritize that. And going back to Matt, what you pointed out, clinical trials, Rohit, you and I see this day in, day out, right? Or anyone listening in, be it from academia or community, we've all had this when I will refer a patient that's traveling for hundreds or thousands of miles to see someone in an academic institution saying, hey, there's this clinical trial, but oops, I'm sorry, you're not the right match. So
Sure.
I'm really hoping that with these AI tools, we're partnering the right patient with the right trial. I really think that's going to be very important.
And how AI is so data driven. And that's where I feel like a lot of these NGS companies, whether that's Tempest, Foundation One, Keras, they'll be able to leverage a lot of the data which was tied in, was used for research. Now, at least it'll be more of an actionable item that they could swift through a lot of the clinical trials and even talk about more targetable treatment options that we'll be able to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hardest thing, and what's unique about oncology is that not only is it already so complex, the complexity is just is increasing, right? There's so many new therapies, things, the therapies are getting so much more precise, and I think there's going to be a kind of point where oncologists can't keep up, right? Like you guys have said this when you guys started the podcast. There's so much more information. How can we guarantee every patient is getting the latest science? One of the things we talk about at DeepScribe is I think there's two kind of ways that healthcare ultimately fails, right? One is ignorance, and the second is ineptitude, right? So one, the science fails to exist, and the second is the science fails to be applied. And with cancer, because there's so much funding in cancer, 80% of pharma R&D goes directly into cancer. There's so much science that's emerging. And I think the thing that we really need to think about, the first use case for AI, is how do we get that science to the fingertips of the clinicians so that every patient is getting the latest science?
Very true.
And again, this is evident with 40 to 50 new drug approvals and indications that we continue to see in oncology year after year. It's not just one hit year where we're seeing plethora of data or approvals. This is happening year after year, and we see this in our clinical practice.
Well, exciting times indeed, for sure.
So we're almost at the end of the podcast, and one of the things that I always ask everybody is, what is one thing that you guys wished, oncologists just knew about technology, and vice versa? What is one thing that you wish people building technology really wish they knew about oncologists and their workflow?
Rohit, do you want to start off and I dive in then?
I'd say that there are, help me out with the question, Matt, with regards to if we knew this aspect, will we be able to address that with AI, or is that what you're trying to get to?
It's I think you have a really interesting background. Your background is in computer science, computer engineering, right? And I think you have a unique perspective that maybe a lot of oncologists may not appreciate. And you're leveraging technology, in ways that others are not, right? What are the things that you wished other oncologists kind of knew that you think that would help them kind of adopt technology?
I'd say the huge aspect is, again, we have talked enough about this during this conversation, is AI itself, adaptability, how, at least from the computer engineering background, I'm able to sort of see this shift happen so fast and run and jump on this train ASAP, whether that's trying different EHRs, experimenting overall with Claude over the weekend. So I've been experimenting quite a bit. But again, adapting to this new models and even tying in coding. I know that a lot of this is becoming more obsolete, where you're able to just talk to the system and you don't even need to know the coding, but still the back end of it is still all the coding that the JScript and all that sort of things ties in. But having that background definitely gives me that leverage. But I feel like the technology, if we had to leverage, if we could expedite the clinical trial accrual process in community settings, that would be a huge aspect. Rahul and I have had conversations with other community oncologists, and Sarah Cannon does that very well, where you have a community oncologist increase that clinical trial percentage. But we need to do better from community standpoint, because at the end of the day, 70% of cancer patients still get treatment out in the community practice.
Yeah, I agree. Community oncology is where we're seeing most of the patients. Matt, just to add a little more to what would I hope tech knows, just to reiterate, let's keep that patient at the center of all this. As a clinician, I want to see better outcomes because of our AI tools, because of the advances we're seeing in better drugs that are becoming available. That is what this is all about. So just keeping all that at the center of all this.
All right, guys. Well, this was a really fun conversation, and thank you guys. I think we're gonna make a believer out of you, Rahul. So one day when I figure out how to get DeepScribe at your practice, I want to maybe we could do a part 2 and get your take on it after.
I would love that. I don't want to be a skeptic. I want to be a realistic. So I would love to come back and talk about my experience with newer AI tools.
This weekend, I'll work on that, Matthew.